Sometimes people decide who you are before you even open your mouth. The first scream came near Gate C-17 at Atlanta International just after 8:40 p.m. A white businessman in a navy cashmere coat suddenly stepped back and pointed across the crowded terminal. "That's her," he snapped loudly enough for half the gate to hear. She was in the private lounge watching people's bags. Conversation stopped almost instantly. Rolling suitcases slowed across the polished floor. A little boy holding a pretzel looked up from his tablet as two airport security officers turned toward the woman standing beside the charging station. Dr. Alana Brooks froze under the cold white airport lights, one hand wrapped around the handle of a worn black carry-on while rain hammered against the massive windows overlooking the runway. She looked exhausted. Not dangerous. Exhausted. Her dark curls were tied loosely behind her head, and faint shadows rested beneath her eyes after nearly 18 straight hours inside a federal medical lab outside Chicago. But nobody around her cared how tired she looked. They only saw a black woman suddenly surrounded by security in one of the busiest airports in America. "Ma'am, we need you to step aside," one officer said carefully while travelers nearby lifted phones into the air. Alana glanced around slowly as more people stopped walking. Some stared openly. Others whispered behind raised coffee cups. One woman quietly pulled her designer purse closer against her chest. Another man muttered, "I knew something felt off." Alana swallowed hard but stayed calm. "Is there a problem?" she asked softly. The businessman walked forward before security could answer. His name was Grant Whitmore, a face that appeared regularly on cable news business panels and financial magazines stacked inside airport bookstores. Expensive watch. Perfect haircut. The kind of man employees rushed to please before he even spoke. "She kept hanging around the first-class lounge," Grant said sharply. "Then I saw her near my briefcase." Alana blinked once. "I never touched your briefcase." "That's not what I saw," he replied. The nearest officer extended his hand toward her carry-on. "Ma'am, we're going to need to inspect your bag." Around them, the terminal seemed to tighten. The loudspeaker announced a delayed flight to Denver while thunder rumbled faintly outside the glass walls. Alana slowly placed her bag on the metal inspection table. Her fingers trembled for half a second before she steadied them again. She knew what everyone around her saw right now. Not a doctor, not a federal specialist, not a grieving widow trying to make it home before midnight, so she could still kiss her daughter goodnight after missing another birthday dinner because of work. No, right now they saw suspicion wrapped in dark skin under fluorescent lights. One officer unzipped her bag while phones continued recording from every angle. A teenage girl whispered, "This is insane," but nobody answered her. Grant crossed his arms confidently as TSA agents searched through folded clothes, medical folders, and a framed photograph tucked carefully between two books. The officer paused briefly when he saw the picture of Alana smiling beside a tall man in military uniform. "Your husband?" he asked quietly before catching himself. Alana nodded once. "He passed away last winter." For the first time, the officer's expression shifted slightly. But before he could speak again, three men in dark federal suits suddenly entered the terminal from the far security corridor, moving fast enough to make nearby officers step aside instinctively. And the moment the lead agent saw Alana standing beside the inspection table, his entire face changed. "Dr. Brooks," he said firmly, almost breathless. "Ma'am, we've been trying to find you. Director Hayes is waiting upstairs right now." The entire terminal went silent so fast that even the rolling suitcase wheels seemed louder against the polished floor. One of the airport officers immediately straightened his posture the second he heard the words, "Director Hayes." The man searching Alana Brooks's bag carefully zipped it back up as if he suddenly realized he had been handling something valuable. Grant Whitmore looked confused at first, then nervous, then pale. "Wait," he said quickly, glancing between the federal agents and the woman he had accused less than 2 minutes earlier. "What exactly is this?" The lead federal agent ignored him completely. His attention stayed fixed on Alana. "Dr. Brooks, Director Hayes has been calling nonstop. Your phone has been going directly to voicemail." Alana looked down at the dead battery, symbol blinking weakly on her phone screen. "I have been in transit since 6 this morning," she answered quietly. Her voice stayed calm, but exhaustion dragged behind every word. "My charger is buried somewhere in my checked luggage." The younger federal agent beside the director exhaled in relief. Washington thought you missed the briefing. Around them, people who had been recording moments earlier slowly lowered their phones. The mood inside the terminal shifted in a way nobody could explain out loud. Just seconds ago, strangers had stared at Alana like she did not belong there. Now airport staff suddenly avoided direct eye contact with her altogether. Grant forced an awkward laugh and adjusted the cuffs of his expensive coat. "Well," he said, attempting to recover his confidence. "Looks like this was all just a misunderstanding." Nobody responded. The silence embarrassed him more than anger would have. Alana slowly reached for the framed photograph that had been removed from her bag during the search. Her fingertips brushed across the image of her late husband in military uniform before she carefully slid the frame back between her folders. The older TSA officer noticed the motion and quietly cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I apologize for how this situation was handled." Alana looked at him for a long moment. Unlike Grant, the officer genuinely looked ashamed. Rain continued streaking down the giant airport windows while another boarding announcement echoed overhead. Flight 228 to Richmond had officially begun boarding at Gate C-22. Alana's flight. She glanced toward the gate number in the distance, then back toward the federal agents waiting beside her. "How long will the briefing take?" she asked. The lead agent hesitated. "Director Hayes believes the evidence package can identify the final names connected to the financial network." Grant's expression changed instantly. His shoulders stiffened. Alana noticed it immediately. So did the federal agents. The younger one slowly turned toward Grant with narrowed eyes. "You know this investigation?" Grant smiled too quickly. "No, of course not. I just recognize the agency." But sweat had already started forming near his collar despite the cold air conditioning flowing through the terminal. Alana studied him silently. For the first time since this started, she looked directly into his eyes without exhaustion clouding her expression. Grant suddenly looked away first. The lead federal agent lowered his voice. "Dr. Brooks, there is something else." Alana frowned slightly. "What happened?" "Another witness came forward an hour ago," he said carefully. "They connected Whitmore Capital Holdings to the offshore transfers." Grant's face drained completely of color. "That is ridiculous," he snapped. "You cannot seriously believe, sir," the younger agent interrupted firmly. "I strongly suggest you stop speaking." Nearby travelers pretended not to listen while listening to every word. The same people who had watched Alana with suspicion moments ago were now staring at Grant with growing discomfort. Alana remained completely still beside the inspection table. No smile, no revenge in her eyes, just quiet understanding. And somehow that calmness unsettled Grant more than anything else in the terminal. Grant Whitmore tried to regain control of the situation the same way powerful men often did when they felt the ground shifting beneath them. He smiled. It was small at first, almost practiced, but everyone near the security checkpoint could see tension pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I think we are getting carried away here," he said carefully while adjusting his coat sleeve again. "I made a simple report because something looked suspicious. That is what airport security tells people to do." The younger federal agent stared at him without blinking. "And what exactly looked suspicious?" Grant opened his mouth, but no words came out immediately. That silence alone changed everything. Travelers nearby exchanged quiet looks. A few minutes earlier, they had accepted Grant's accusation without question. Now people were replaying the moment in their heads, noticing details they ignored before. Alana standing quietly beside a charging station. Alana reading medical files. Alana never raising her voice once. The older TSA officer slowly stepped back from the inspection table. His expression had become noticeably uncomfortable. "Sir," he said toward Grant, "did you actually see her take anything?" Grant hesitated again. "I saw her near my briefcase." "Near it?" the officer repeated. "Or touching it?" The businessman looked irritated now. "Does that really matter?" The answer landed badly. Even the nearby travelers reacted to it. A woman in a gray hoodie lowered her phone and frowned openly. An older man sitting near the gate shook his head under his breath. Grant noticed the mood turning against him and immediately tried another approach. "Look," he said, forcing a lighter tone. "Clearly Dr. Brooks is important. Nobody is questioning that now." Alana finally spoke. "But you questioned it before." Her voice remained soft, almost tired, which somehow made the words heavier. Grant looked at her directly for the first time since the federal agents arrived. The confidence in his face flickered. I did not know who you were. Alana held his gaze calmly. Exactly. The rain outside intensified, streaking silver across the giant windows overlooking the runway lights. Inside the terminal, boarding groups continued forming nearby, but many passengers still lingered around the checkpoint pretending to organize bags or check flight updates while secretly listening. The lead federal agent stepped closer to Alana. Dr. Brooks, we need to move upstairs immediately. Director Hayes has the task force waiting. She nodded slowly, then glanced toward the departure board again. Richmond. Delayed another 20 minutes. Her daughter would still be awake if she hurried. Maybe. The thought briefly softened her expression before exhaustion returned again. Can someone explain what this is actually about? The TSA officer asked quietly. The younger federal agent exchanged a glance with his supervisor before answering carefully. Dr. Brooks specializes in forensic financial reconstruction. Several people nearby looked confused. Grant did not. His jaw tightened instantly. Alana noticed it again. She helped uncover over $400 million moved through fake medical charities and shell companies during the last 18 months, the agent continued. Tonight's briefing may identify the final account holders connected to the operation. Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead while rolling thunder echoed outside the terminal walls. Then a woman near the coffee stand whispered quietly, "Oh my God." Grant suddenly laughed again, but this time the sound felt thin and unstable. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "You are acting like I committed a crime because I reported suspicious behavior." The older TSA officer looked directly at him now. "No, sir," he said carefully. "People are reacting because you only found her suspicious after deciding she did not belong." Grant's face hardened instantly. That is not what happened. But even he no longer sounded convinced by his own words. Alana slowly lifted her carry-on bag from the inspection table. Her shoulders looked heavy beneath the airport lights, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of being forced into moments like this over and over again. And somehow, everyone standing there finally understood that this had probably not been the first time. The boarding announcement for Richmond echoed through the terminal again, but Dr. Alana Brooks did not move toward the gate. She stood quietly beside the inspection table while travelers slowly returned to their seats, though nobody looked at the airport the same way anymore. A few people avoided eye contact with her out of embarrassment. Others kept glancing toward Grant Whitmore with growing suspicion. The balance inside the terminal had completely shifted. 20 minutes earlier, Grant had controlled the room with nothing but confidence and a sharp accusation. Now every movement he made looked nervous. Every breath sounded forced. The younger federal agent stepped aside to answer a call, speaking in low tones near the window overlooking the rain-soaked runway. Meanwhile, the lead agent stayed close to Alana, lowering his voice respectfully. Director Hayes moved the meeting upstairs to the executive conference level, he explained. The Treasury Department joined remotely from Washington 10 minutes ago. Alana closed her eyes briefly, pressing 2 fingers against her temple as exhaustion rolled through her body again. "I have not slept in almost 30 hours, she admitted softly. "And my daughter still thinks I am coming home tonight." The agent's expression softened. "Your work tonight could help recover hundreds of millions tied to medical fraud." Alana gave a faint nod. "I know." She sounded less proud than tired. Nearby, Grant slowly reached into his pocket for his phone. The older TSA officer noticed immediately. "Sir," he said carefully, "I would advise you not to leave the terminal right now." Grant looked offended. "Am I being detained?" "Nobody said that." "Then I have a flight to catch." But his voice no longer carried authority. It carried urgency. Alana noticed the tremor in his hand while he checked his screen. 3 missed calls. Then another incoming call immediately appeared. Grant declined it so fast that even the TSA officer noticed. "Everything okay, sir?" the officer asked. "Perfectly fine." But sweat glistened along Grant's forehead despite the cool airport air. The younger federal agent returned from his phone call with a noticeably different expression. Serious now. Alert. He leaned toward his supervisor and whispered something too low for the crowd to hear. Alana watched the lead agent's eyes narrow slightly before he turned toward Grant again. "Mr. Whitmore," he said calmly, "would you mind remaining available for a few additional questions tonight?" Grant laughed sharply. "You cannot seriously be connecting me to this because I reported suspicious behavior." Nobody answered him immediately. That silence was becoming unbearable for him. The lead agent reached into his coat pocket and removed a thin tablet device. With a few taps, he turned the screen toward Alana. Rows of financial transfers appeared across the display. Offshore accounts, charity foundations, medical relief, organizations. Alana studied the information carefully, her exhaustion suddenly replaced by focus. The same quiet woman who had looked drained moments earlier now seemed completely different under the fluorescent lights. Sharper, controlled, dangerous in an entirely different way. These transfers accelerated during the last 6 weeks, the agent explained. Someone started moving funds after your testimony in Chicago. Alana's eyes moved across the screen rapidly. No, she said softly after several seconds. Not someone. She pointed toward a sequence of transactions connected through identical routing structures. This was coordinated by somebody who knew the investigation timeline in advance. The younger agent frowned. An insider? Alana nodded slowly. Or someone with direct access to the executive reports. Grant shifted his weight almost immediately. It was subtle, but Alana noticed. So did the agents. The rain outside continued pounding against the glass, while another thunderclap rolled over the runway. Grant suddenly forced another smile. Honestly, this all sounds incredibly complicated. I run investment firms. I do not understand half of what you are talking about. Alana looked up from the tablet and met his eyes calmly. That is interesting, she said quietly. Because the routing pattern on this screen was designed by someone with advanced corporate structuring experience. Grant stopped smiling. Completely. The terminal fell silent again around them, as even nearby passengers sensed something changing beneath the surface. Then the younger federal agent's earpiece crackled sharply, and his face tightened instantly. Sir, he said under his breath to the lead agent. Washington just flagged Whitmore Capital directly. The words hit the terminal harder than the thunder outside. Washington just flagged Whitmore Capital directly. For one brief second, nobody moved. Not the TSA officers. Not the passengers pretending not to listen. Not even Grant Whitmore himself. The businessman stood frozen beside the security checkpoint while the rain hammered against the giant windows overlooking the runway. Then everything inside him seemed to collapse at once. That is impossible, Grant said quickly, but his voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. The younger federal agent touched the earpiece again, listening carefully while travelers nearby exchanged stunned looks. The Financial Crimes Task Force confirmed it 2 minutes ago, he said to his supervisor. Multiple offshore accounts are tied to Whitmore subsidiaries. Grant immediately shook his head. No, you are making a mistake. My company manages hundreds of accounts. Alana Brooks stayed completely calm. She watched him the same way she had studied the financial transfers moments earlier. Patient, silent, focused. The lead federal agent slowly locked the tablet screen and looked directly at Grant. Sir, we are not discussing random accounting discrepancies anymore. Grant laughed nervously again, but now the sound felt desperate. This is insane. You cannot connect me to some international fraud case because of paperwork. Alana finally spoke. Paperwork leaves patterns. Her tone stayed soft, but every person nearby heard her clearly. And patterns reveal people. Grant looked at her sharply. You think you know me because you looked at numbers on a screen? Alana did not react emotionally. No, she answered quietly. I noticed you became nervous before anyone mentioned your company by name. The silence afterward was unbearable. Even the rolling announcements overhead seemed quieter now. The older TSA officer slowly removed his gloves and tucked them into his pocket, no longer pretending this was an ordinary airport misunderstanding. Nearby passengers who had once stared suspiciously at Alana now looked at Grant with open discomfort. One woman whispered. He tried to blame her before anyone blamed him. Another traveler lowered his phone completely, ashamed he had recorded the earlier confrontation at all. Grant noticed the shifting atmosphere around him and grew visibly irritated. This is exactly the problem, he snapped suddenly. People rush to conclusions. The words hung in the air for a moment before the irony reached everyone at once. Alana looked at him steadily. Not angry, not satisfied, just tired. Yes, she said softly. Grant opened his mouth to argue again, but his phone suddenly vibrated in his hand. The screen lit up with another incoming call from his office in New York. Then another immediately after that. He declined each one faster than the last. The younger federal agent noticed. "Sir," he said carefully, "you may want to answer one of those." Grant stared at him coldly. "I want my attorney. You are free to contact legal counsel." "So, I am being detained?" At this moment, the lead agent answered calmly. "You are being asked not to leave the terminal while federal investigators verify active financial records connected to your corporation." A murmur spread quietly through the nearby passengers. The same crowd that had silently accepted Grant's accusation earlier was now watching him with disbelief. Alana adjusted the strap of her carry-on bag over her shoulder. Her body looked exhausted beneath the harsh airport lighting. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. She still had not eaten since morning. Yet somehow she remained the calmest person in the terminal. The lead federal agent turned toward her respectfully. "Dr. Brooks, Director Hayes says the encrypted files just arrived upstairs." Alana nodded once. "Then we finally have enough." Grant looked at her instantly. Enough for what? She studied him for several long seconds while thunder rolled low across the Atlanta skyline outside the glass. "Enough," she said quietly, "to see who everyone really is when pressure arrives." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Grant's expression tightened as realization slowly spread across his face. This was no longer about one embarrassing airport incident. The investigation had already been closing around him long before tonight ever started. And somehow, the woman he dismissed as suspicious had been the person leading it the entire time. For the first time that night, the terminal became truly quiet. Not the ordinary airport quiet filled with rolling luggage and distant announcements. This silence felt heavier than that. People stopped pretending not to stare. Rainwater crawled slowly down the giant windows while runway lights reflected across the polished floor like blurred gold lines. Grant Whitmore stood near the security checkpoint with his phone still clutched tightly in his hand, but the confidence that once surrounded him had disappeared completely. Dr. Alana Brooks noticed it immediately. Fear changed people faster than truth ever could. The younger federal agent stepped several feet away to continue speaking through his earpiece, while the lead agent remained beside Alana. "The Treasury Department confirmed emergency warrants are already being drafted," he said quietly enough that nearby passengers could not fully hear. Alana closed her eyes for a brief second. Not relief, not satisfaction, just exhaustion. "How many accounts?" she asked. "So far? 23 domestic, 8 offshore." Alana nodded slowly. "Then the network is bigger than we estimated." The agent studied her face carefully. "Dr. Brooks, you predicted this almost a year ago." She gave a faint smile without humor. "Nobody listened a year ago." Those words stayed hanging in the cold airport air. A janitor pushed a cleaning cart quietly across the far end of the terminal while boarding calls echoed overhead for flights nobody nearby seemed interested in anymore. The older TSA officer finally stepped closer to Alana again. He looked uncomfortable, almost ashamed. "Dr. Brooks," he said softly, "I owe you another apology." She turned toward him politely. "You were doing your job." "No," he admitted. "I stopped doing my job the moment I assumed the accusation was enough." Alana looked at him for several seconds before answering. "Fear spreads fast in public places." The officer lowered his eyes slightly. "Still should have treated you better." Nearby, a young woman who had recorded the confrontation earlier slowly deleted the video from her phone. Another traveler folded his arms uncomfortably and stared down at the floor. People were beginning to realize they had participated in something ugly long before the truth appeared. Meanwhile, Grant stood isolated several feet away, no longer surrounded by attention or authority. He looked smaller now somehow. The expensive coat, the polished shoes, the television smile. None of it protected him anymore. His phone rang again. This time he answered immediately and turned his back to the crowd. "I told you not over the phone," he hissed under his breath. Even from a distance, the panic in his voice was obvious. Alana looked away from him toward the rain outside. Her reflection stared back faintly in the dark glass. Tired eyes, tension in her shoulders. The thin silver necklace she still wore every day after her husband's death rested quietly against her sweater collar. She suddenly remembered her daughter waiting at home beside a birthday cake that had probably already melted around the candles by now. The thought hit harder than the entire airport confrontation. The lead federal agent noticed her expression shift. "You can still make the late connection if we move quickly," he said gently. Alana exhaled slowly. "I promised her I would not miss another birthday." You are trying to stop people who stole cancer relief funds from children's hospitals, the agent reminded her. Your daughter will understand someday. Alana looked down at the photograph still tucked carefully inside her bag. Her late husband smiling proudly in uniform beneath bright summer sunlight. He used to tell her the same thing whenever work pulled them apart. Do the hard thing anyway, even when nobody claps for it. Thunder rolled softly outside again, while airport lights flickered against the rain. Then Alana noticed something strange. Grant had ended his phone call, but instead of looking angry or defensive, he looked defeated. Completely defeated. His shoulders slumped as he stared at the floor beneath him like a man finally realizing the walls around his life had already started collapsing long before tonight. And somehow, seeing that expression did not make Alana feel victorious at all. It only made her tired. The storm outside Atlanta International had grown heavier by the minute. Rain slammed against the glass walls in steady waves while distant lightning flashed across the dark runway beyond the terminal. Inside Gate C-17, most travelers had stopped pretending they were not watching anymore. The atmosphere no longer felt like an airport delay. It felt like the final moments. Before something irreversible. Grant Whitmore stood alone near the security checkpoint with both hands gripping his phone tightly enough to whiten his knuckles. He had stopped making excuses now. Stopped trying to sound confident. The television-ready smile was gone. All that remained was a tired man realizing his money could no longer control the room around him. Dr. Alana Brooks watched quietly from several feet away while the federal agents reviewed information arriving from Washington. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion beneath the cold terminal lights, but her eyes remained steady, focused, calm. The younger federal agent suddenly looked up from his tablet. We just received the banking mirror logs, he said to his supervisor. The shell transfers matched the timeline Dr. Brooks predicted last November. The lead agent exhaled slowly. Then it is confirmed. Nearby passengers exchanged nervous looks again. One businessman quietly closed his laptop. A woman standing near the coffee stand folded her arms tightly across her chest. Nobody wanted to speak too loudly anymore. Grant finally stepped forward. Dr. Brooks, he said carefully, almost cautiously now. She looked at him without expression. I need to ask you something. The lead federal agent immediately moved slightly between them, but Alana gave a small nod. It is fine. Grant swallowed hard before speaking again. Did you know who I was the moment you saw me in the lounge? Alana answered honestly. No, the response visibly surprised him. You really had no idea? I was reviewing hospital fraud records and trying to stay awake after an 18-hour shift, she said quietly. I was not paying attention to you. Those words seemed to hit Grant harder than everything else that night, because suddenly the entire confrontation looked different. All the suspicion, all the humiliation, all the attention he had drawn toward her, and she had never even noticed him until he accused her publicly. Grant looked down at the floor for several seconds before speaking again. Then why did you look at me like that after the agents arrived? Alana adjusted the strap of her carry-on slowly. Because I recognized the reaction. Grant frowned slightly. What reaction? The moment you realized I belonged somewhere you thought I could not belong. Silence spread between them again. The older TSA officer quietly looked away, ashamed because he understood exactly what she meant. The rain outside softened slightly now, turning into long silver streaks across the windows while runway lights reflected through the water like blurred stars. Grant's voice became quieter than before. You think I accused you because you are black. Alana held his gaze calmly. I think you trusted your assumptions faster than the facts. He opened his mouth to argue again, but nothing came out this time. Because deep down, he knew she was right. One of the federal agents nearby suddenly received another message through his earpiece and looked toward his supervisor immediately. Sir, he said quietly, New York prosecutors just froze Whitmore Capital Holdings pending review. Several passengers nearby inhaled sharply. Grant closed his eyes for a brief moment, like someone absorbing the sound of a door locking somewhere far away. But when he looked back at Alana, something inside him had changed. The anger was gone now. So was the arrogance. He looked human for the first time all night. I embarrassed you in front of everyone here, he admitted softly. And you still never tried to humiliate me back. Alana glanced around the terminal. The phones had disappeared. The whispers had faded. Even the airport staff moved more gently now. Then she looked back at him. Public shame does not teach people anything, she said quietly. Truth usually does. Grant lowered his head slightly as thunder rolled one final time across the runway outside. And for the first time that night, nobody in the terminal saw him as powerful anymore. The storm finally began drifting east of the airport sometime after 10 o'clock, leaving long trails of rainwater sliding down the massive terminal windows. Inside Gate C-17, the tension that had gripped the crowd for nearly an hour slowly faded into something quieter, something heavier. Travelers returned to their seats in silence, while airport employees resumed ordinary routines, but nobody moved with the same energy as before. Too much had changed in too little time. Dr. Alana Brooks stood near the window overlooking the runway lights while the federal agents finalized updates from Washington. The younger agent spoke softly into his earpiece while the lead investigator reviewed files on his tablet. Nearby, Grant Whitmore remained seated alone beside the charging station where this entire night had started. His expensive coat rested folded beside him now, forgotten. He looked exhausted, smaller somehow, like the airport had stripped away everything performative and left only the man underneath. Alana noticed him staring quietly at the floor for several minutes before he finally stood and walked toward her again. This time there was no arrogance in his posture, no performance, no cameras recording. Just a tired man carrying the weight of his own choices. The federal agents immediately straightened, but Alana gave another calm nod. It is all right. Grant stopped several feet away from her, close enough to speak privately, but not close enough to invade her space again. For a moment, he said nothing at all. The runway lights reflected across the glass behind Alana, surrounding her in soft gold and silver light, while distant planes taxied slowly through the rain. Finally, Grant exhaled shakily. I keep replaying it in my head, he admitted quietly. Alana waited without interrupting. The moment I pointed at you. His eyes lowered. I did not even question myself. Nobody around them spoke. Even the nearby TSA officer pretended to check paperwork while quietly listening. Grant swallowed hard before continuing. I saw a black woman sitting in a private lounge, looking tired, carrying an old bag, and somehow my brain decided you did not belong there. Alana looked out toward the runway again. That happens more often than people admit. I know, he said softly. I just never thought I was one of those people. The honesty in his voice caught even him off guard. He looked embarrassed by it. Alana slowly crossed her arms against the cold terminal air. Most people who judge others do not think they are doing it. Grant gave a weak laugh, filled with regret. That almost makes it worse. The younger federal agent stepped away respectfully to give them privacy, while passengers nearby quietly avoided staring too openly. Grant rubbed his hands together nervously. I built my whole life around appearing successful, he admitted. Perfect schools, perfect business image, perfect interviews. He shook his head slowly. And tonight I realized how quickly I assumed someone else could not belong in the same space as me. Alana finally looked directly at him again. Power makes assumptions feel normal. Grant nodded once, almost painfully. I humiliated you publicly. Yes, she answered honestly. He winced slightly at the simplicity of the word. Then he looked at her carefully. Why are you still being kind to me? The question lingered between them while thunder rumbled faintly far beyond the airport now. Alana's expression softened just slightly. Because humiliation changes behavior temporarily, she said quietly. Understanding changes people permanently. Grant stared at her for several seconds without speaking. His eyes looked red now, not from anger, but from exhaustion and shame. The lead federal agent approached carefully from behind. Dr. Brooks, the conference room is ready upstairs. She nodded once. Grant stepped aside immediately this time without being asked. As Alana lifted her carry-on bag again, Grant spoke one final time. Dr. Brooks. She paused. I am sorry. The terminal became silent again. No dramatic music. No applause. Just honesty hanging in cold airport air beneath fluorescent lights. Alana studied him for a long moment before answering softly. Then do better the next time you look at someone. Grant lowered his head quietly while she walked past him toward the private elevator beside the federal agents. And not a single person in the terminal looked at her the same way anymore. By the time Dr. Alana Brooks stepped out of the executive conference room, the airport had changed completely. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving the runway washed clean beneath the early morning lights. Most of the terminal had quieted into that strange silence airports only have. After midnight, When exhausted travelers sleep against backpacks and tired employees move like shadows beneath fluorescent ceilings. Alana walked slowly beside the federal agents through the upper corridor overlooking the main terminal below. Her body ached from exhaustion after nearly an entire day without rest. But the investigation was finally moving toward arrests, frozen accounts, and recovered medical funds that would return to children's hospitals across the country. The lead federal agent glanced toward her with quiet respect. Washington wants you back in Chicago tomorrow afternoon. Alana smiled faintly. Tomorrow afternoon, I promised my daughter pancakes. The younger agent laughed softly. After tonight, I think you earned the right to take one morning off. They reached the private elevator overlooking the terminal where everything had begun earlier that evening. From above, Alana could still see the security checkpoint near gate C-17. The inspection table had been cleared away. Travelers had moved on. The airport looked ordinary again. But Alana knew moments like tonight never fully disappeared from the people who experienced them. They stayed quietly inside you long after the crowd forgot. As the elevator doors opened, Alana noticed someone still sitting below near the charging station. Grant Whitmore. Alone. The expensive confidence he carried earlier that night had vanished completely now. No television smile. No polished image. Just a tired man sitting beneath cold airport lights while his entire life slowly unraveled somewhere beyond the terminal walls. For a moment, Alana considered simply leaving without another word. But something made her pause. She turned toward the agents. I will meet you downstairs. The lead investigator studied her carefully before nodding once. We will hold the car. Alana rode the elevator down alone. The soft hum of the descending cables echoed quietly around her, while runway lights shimmered through the glass outside. When the doors opened, Grant looked up immediately. Surprise crossed his face when he saw her walking toward him again. Dr. Brooks, he said softly, standing halfway before seeming unsure whether he should. Alana stopped beside the empty seat across from him. Did your flight leave? She asked. Grant gave a weak smile. I think missing my flight stopped being the biggest problem tonight. For the first time, there was no defensiveness left in his voice. Only honesty. Alana sat down slowly across from him, setting her carry-on beside her feet. Nearby, an airport employee quietly mopped rainwater near the entrance while distant boarding announcements echoed through the sleeping terminal. Grant rubbed his tired eyes. Everything I built is probably finished. Alana looked at him calmly. Maybe the version you built on appearances is. He stared at her silently for several seconds. How are you still this calm with me? He finally asked. After what I did. Alana glanced out toward the quiet runway. Because anger gets heavy after a while. Grant lowered his head. I spent my whole life thinking success meant becoming untouchable. And now? He exhaled slowly. Now I think it might mean learning how to see people correctly before life forces you to. The words settled gently between them. No speeches. No dramatic music. Just truth arriving too late for comfort, but early enough for change. Alana stood carefully and lifted her bag again. Her phone buzzed softly in her coat pocket. A new text message appeared from her daughter. Are you coming home tonight? Attached beneath it was a blurry photo of a birthday cake with melted candles and one empty chair beside the table. Alana smiled sadly at the screen before typing back only 3 words. On my way home. She slipped the phone away and looked back at Grant one final time. Do better with the next person, she said quietly. Grant nodded once, unable to speak. Then Alana walked toward the exit beneath the soft glow of airport lights, while morning slowly approached beyond the rain-covered runway. And behind her, for the first time all night, nobody looked away when she passed.